Joining us again is the newly and relatively free Marshall Eddie Conway and his colleague and comrade, Ms. Dominque Stevenson. Conway is a native of a still segregated Baltimore. He would eventually go off to Vietnam, come back to join the evolving civil rights and human rights movements here in the United States, where he joined the Baltimore chapter of the Black Panther Party, only soon finding out that it was necessary to rebuild that chapter from scratch. And it is from that work that Conway found himself falsely convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, where he has just completed more than 44 years of incarceration. Conway now works here in Baltimore with Ms. Dominque Stevenson and others at the Friend of a Friend program, and joins us. They both now join us to discuss some of that of Conway's remarkable life and continuing work. And to that extent, we welcome both of you back to the program. Welcome back, and thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Thank you.
So we're taping this a little bit in advance of 4th of July coming up on this week. Friday, 4th of July falls this Friday in 2014. And as we were just talking a little bit off air, oftentimes we think of this. We're encouraged to think of this as a moment to reflect on all the wonderful democracy and freedom that this country has brought to people in around the world and here and in around the world. And those of us from certain political traditions are often encouraged to remember Frederick Douglass's famous speech of what does this holiday mean to the enslaved. And as someone who has just come out of the modern day equivalent or the modern day extension of that same slave experience, I thought first to ask you, before we get into some of your life and work, what are your thoughts of this holiday of the 4th of July? What does it mean to a newly freed, so as we're encouraged to call you, a newly freed enslaved African? How do you feel about this being your first 4th of July in a long time outside of prison walls?
Well, I'm actually conflicted because I do understand in the community that families gather and they take this opportunity to have celebrations of their family structure and so on. But the truth of the matter is we have no reason to be celebrating the 4th of July when the 4th of July is probably one of those most devastating dates that's been happened to people of color all over the world. The destruction of traditional civilizations has resulted from this 4th of July celebration, from the creation of this empire and the destruction of nations. So I think, in hindsight and today, we have to look at the 4th of July as something that we really shouldn't be celebrating. It should be a period of mourning. But I do understand that our families need to get together. We want to share food together. We want to find ways in which to commune with each other. That's all well and good. But we have to look at the amount of destruction that's happened to the world, the amount of people of color that's in the prison system, which is a tremendous 25% of the world's prison population is right here in America, which only has 5% of the world's population. Of that 25% of the prison population, something like 75% are people of color. So it's not only is it disproportionate, but it's bordering on genocide. And that's not even to mention the fact that there are people still lingering in the prison system that's been there for 40, 50 years. And in some cases, they've been framed by the government. In other cases, they're innocent. And all the time we look at individual cases where people were released after 20 years or 30 years or 40 years and say, oh, that's right, the system is working. But the fact of the matter is that there are tens of thousands of people in the system and it is not working for them. And they're suffering and they're dying and they never get any kind of relief or justice. So I don't know what we have to celebrate on the 4th of July, to be quite honest. And the last time I was at a 4th of July holiday conditions were like really bad. I was a member at that time of the Black Panther Party, and we were organizing to change conditions. Now, this time, conditions are far worse, and it is scary because instead of us making progress over the last 40-some years, we have actually went back in terms of how our communities are collapsing and deteriorating. So it concerns me when we celebrate something that's supposed to be great for the whole world, but it's actually very destructive and devastating for us, and there's no reflection or attention on that at this point.
Yeah, a couple of things that you brought up, and Dominque, please get in as you feel. But I was just looking up again here. I've just heard of recently the new book from Gerald Horne that's just apparently come out about a month or so ago, called "The Counter-Revolution of 1776." Slave resistance and the origins of the United States of America. And I've heard in some interviews he's already talked a little bit about with this book, and some from previous work of his that I'm familiar with, where he talks about how the founding of this nation, the so-called revolution in this country, actually hurt the progress of ending enslavement of African people here and around the world. That it was itself something that instituted a block of progress. So it's interesting to hear not only your reaction or reflection on that, but even the point you just made that you say it's worse now than it was the last time you were, active in the community. That the conditions Black people face is worse today. So I would want, if you would, to not. I wouldn't want to let that point just disappear here. I would want you to, if you would, say a word or two about what you mean by these conditions worsening. Or being worse today. And then I was also curious to see, to ask how you all dealt with, or was it similar to how you've already described your impressions of the 4th of July now, in terms of how you and the Panther Party dealt with this holiday at the time that organization was in full swing? In other words, did you all approach it the same way you just said, that we know people want to use it to gather and have cookouts and this, that, and the third, but we have work to do? And we have contradictions we need to highlight. Or were there other ways that you saw it as a member of the Black Panther Party, this holiday in particular?
Yeah, I think we always made a point of pointing out the truth to people. It was like you were saying about the Douglass speech. Mm-hmm. We always kind of like made it plain that yes, some people in our community, in fact, has made some progress, but the overwhelming majority of the people in our community their conditions have actually declined. Mm-hmm. And even then, we were organizing survival programs. We were organizing programs in which fed people in the community that was hungry. We were organizing programs that brought clothes and health care, medical services to the community. We were organizing, even then, buses to the prison system. And then at that time, the prison system was like a percentage of what it is now. And the prisons were not even as far away as they are now. Now they are out in far-reach areas. Mm-hmm. And it's almost impossible for families to even visit their loved ones under those conditions without staying overnight and having hotel fees. So we were organizing all that stuff then. Now it's worse in so many ways. It's worse in the fact that not just gentrification has wiped out a tremendous amount of our communities, but it's gentrification that has no balance. And no balance, I mean, in sense, it's okay to renovate houses in the community. It's okay to have various levels of class people participating in the community, as long as it's a whole community that spans the range of incomes. But the fact is that people are being removed that doesn't have the financial well-being to stay in that area. The area is being renovated, and then it's turned over to people that's financially better off. And those displaced people can't get back in the community. The community loses its sense of a community, and And now we're in a predicament where we have no neighbors in the hood, so to speak, and that's one of the things that the
that De La Soul line I always quote, where they say hoods are now hoods because nobody's neighbors. We're just surviving with that animal behavior.
Those conditions, and even while that gentrification is going on, there's whether it's Bank of America, Wells Fargo, or Chase Manhattan, or whatever, they are redlining districts, and they are allowing the housing stock to fall in disrepair deliberately so that large tracts of land can be brought up. And even as this is happening, the automation, cybernation, computers, robots, etc., is taking away what little jobs that we had, blue-collar jobs and other kind of jobs. And the workforce is shrinking down to a position where there's like technocrats. You got to have a master's, you got to have a doctor's degree, you have to have that white smock on in order to be employed in such a way in which you can take care of yourself, and not in a way in which you work 40 hours a week and still need food stamps. That's having a devastating impact upon the community, and the community is responding to it by various kind of underground economies and activities to survive. And a lot of people are trying to escape the reality by inducing intoxication in one form or another. And the community is just really, really in bad shape. And it's something that we'll have to address, because obviously if it's sliding backwards, then we need to take a step up and try to stop that slide.
That's Marshall Eddie Conway. I'm Jared Ball. We're also joined by Dominque Stevenson. This is for I Mix What I Like. More information on this show and more can be found at imixwhatilike.org. You can check us out at rapstation.com, airing Sundays at 11 o'clock. And, of course, right here, WPFW 89.3 FM, Fridays, 10 a.m. Dominque Stevenson, let me also bring you into this conversation. You have also long made this comparison between the prisons and the system of slavery. You've done a lot of work, continue to do a lot of work dealing with people while they're incarcerated, and then, of course, when they get out. How do you think, if there's anything you would want to add to this 4th of July holiday conversation, how do you think it's best to approach people as they gather to commemorate, or to at least gather for family, not necessarily to commemorate, because we hear the same thing with Thanksgiving and all these other holidays. Nobody's gathering for genocide to celebrate genocide of indigenous people, but they say we all want turkey and football. Same thing with 4th of July. We want fireworks and cookouts and an excuse to have a day off and drink beer. How do you approach people in the work that you do, or how would you encourage people to interpret this holiday?
I think one, if people really understood what they were celebrating, maybe there would be a different approach to this holiday. I mean, I look at it as if we are really reinforcing and celebrating white supremacy, and nothing less than that. So I think that, to me, is one of the biggest issues, is the need to really educate about these things. There are other important dates in our history as people of African descent. The Haitian Revolution, the date that started, many rebellions that occurred here in the United States. There are so many dates key to our history here that many of us don't really know about. I
mean, even today as we tape this is Patrice Lumumba's birthday. I mean, that would be, something, just another date we could gather around and commemorate,
If nothing else, it's Paul Williams from the Temptations' birthday. I mean, hey.
Right, anything is better than right.
It really is, but the other thing, too, is as people who are really forced to work and often very caught up in just day-to-day struggles financially, I think we take any day off and we're going to use that to gather, because the reality about a lot of people's lives is, yes, they have to grind, and they don't have that time to spend with family. And historically, we've always celebrated in their shadow in terms of their holidays, because we were enslaved. So if there was a period when we happened to be off because, the master's up in the big house celebrating, we did it,
right.
So that I do really understand, but I think that is critical that we do more education about these things and really, really look at what it is we're celebrating.
I mean, Eddie, in a minute, I'd like to go back and have you recount some of your story, because I think that for those who haven't, either read your book, read the book you all wrote together, Martial Law, Life and Times of Baltimore Black Panther, or any of these other pieces or interviews that you've done, I think that story is important to recount. But I wanted to ask you, Dominque, while about the work you all are doing now. Tell us a little bit about this work that Friend of a Friend is doing now. What is coming up, and I would also be curious to know how you connect this sort of this ideological approach, this political approach to interpreting the world to that work that you do. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, maybe the last time I was on here, we were banned. I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, we're back in the prison system in Maryland. So we're primarily doing most of our work in the Jessup area. Also, I've expanded the program into the federal system. So I have a program at U.S. Penitentiary Lee in Virginia, and we're looking at expanding into Washington State. So the program is growing outside of the bonds, of Maryland, which is good for us. And a lot of the folks who are involved in this program have that critical consciousness. And so they're not just doing mentoring, they're not just doing conflict resolution, they're raising the consciousness of young people in the prison population. So these are the kind of dialogues that would be had, around this time. It's like, what is the 4th of July to us? Mm-hmm. How meaningful is it to folks who basically have no rights? So those are some of the, we're continuing the prison work in addition to Eddie coming on board and really doing more outreach into the community and expanding the work in that way. Many of the brothers who had come out were already doing some of the community work, but I think Eddie's expanded it in ways and into populations that we had not been reaching. So it's growing.
I would like to add something too, because like the name Friend of a Friend itself, I think it's important and significant in this work that we're doing, because that came basically from the abolitionist period, and it was the code that people used to help escaped slaves travel north and in seeking their freedom. They would knock on the door and somebody would say, "Who is it?" And it would be like a friend of a friend. And they would be able to make their way through the Underground Railroad to Canada or to other places north in which they could at least organize and experience some sense of freedom. That same concept is being used in the prison system now among the prisoners, because we're equipping them with the critical thinking piece and with the organizing skills and with the conscious raising, so that they can escape from that whole slavery kind of institution, like the plantations that exist in the prison system. And basically now they can come out and they can knock on the door and say, and when somebody say, "Who is it?" they'll say a friend of a friend, and they can get help, and they can get help moving further to organizing and gaining their freedom. And in this case, we're not escaping north, because like what we found out the hard way was that the only place that's not south is the Arctic Circle. So we're still in the south. So we need to stay where we are and do the work that we need to do to kind of like turn this thing around.
Yeah, and that's what that Malcolm X joke that the real Mason-Dixon line is the Canadian border, and that may not even be sufficient enough either.
The Inuits, the natives up there in Canada had found out the hard way,
Well, it's like
it's the Arctic Circle.
The other people's colonialism always looks green on the other side, or whatever.
Yeah.
Imperialism on the other side of the fence always looks better than That's Marshall Eddie Conway and Dominque Stevenson joining us here at I Mix What I Like. I'm Jared Ball. I mixwhatilike.org for more on this show and more. Well, it's interesting. We just mentioned Malcolm X. I mean, this past week, and I meant to ask you about this anyway. This is also the 50th anniversary of the. So I know it's the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act this year, but it's also the 50th anniversary of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Mm-hmm. Any comment on Malcolm, on that organization, on any reflections you have of him and his influence on you, or maybe or any comment at all? It just popped into my head that this was to ask you about that.
Well, I think probably as I and I've kind of like looked at history and studied history, but it's for me, Malcolm X is probably the most influential individual in the history of our struggle. A lot of people struggled, a lot of people organized, a lot of people moved his program forward, but I think it starts right there. I think he, and that's not to take anything away from Garvey and his great organizing skills and so on, but I think it started with the frame of mind. I think at some point there was a frame of mind that, we need to learn from other people around the world what they did to gain their freedom and what they did to kind of like organize their resources so that they could liberate their particular territories and so on. I think Malcolm X brought that to the front, and a lot of people have taken that up, even though he was martyred and sacrificed his life in that process. His impact is still reaching around the world today, and it has reached, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of individuals that are now doing work in their own particular areas, in their own perspectives, based on the fact of what he did and where he stood. So I think he's a significant person in our struggle, but he's definitely a significant person in my life. And just a little point, it was while I was in Europe. I went to a play called Patrick X, and I was just out on a date, and we were just going to a play.
And this is
in Denmark. Yeah, this is before I joined the Black Panther Party.
This is mid-60s.
This is in the 60s. This is like 66. This is like about a year after he was assassinated. Mm-hmm. It might even have been only months after. They were over in Europe doing plays. And I went and I saw the play, and I seen this guy, Patrick X, get assassinated. And then, at the end, the commentary was that this is based on a true story that happened in, America. I wasn't here when that happened. Mm-hmm. And so but then they were selling his books and so on. And I actually that's where I actually started reading and started kind of like becoming aware of what was going on. It didn't move me to action at that point, but it certainly raised my consciousness, and that was all the way back there, around the world. People were talking about what happened to him and the sacrifice that he had made in his vision, So he's very significant.
Sure. Well, you mentioned it. So you were in Europe in the mid '60s, and I mentioned a little bit in the introduction that you were born and raised in Baltimore. You go off to serve in Vietnam. I'm assuming this was a draft situation.
Unfortunately, not. Not. I volunteered. I really wanted to get out of Baltimore, to be quite honest, and that was one of those kind of things that we had going for us at the time. You could either play basketball, or you could join the military. Mm-hmm. They were, or you could have a singing group, similar to what's going on today. It's nothing. I mean, they were the ways out. Right. So if you wanted to leave the state, to leave the area, you had to kind of like get caught up in one of those kind of activities. And so, since I didn't have any voice and certainly didn't have any basketball skills, into the Army I went. Right. Which was a mistake. But it was a mistake that I probably needed to make in order to understand the ramifications of what the military was doing all around the world. I was at some point shocked, but you don't know that from here.
Yeah, most still don't know.
You don't even know the amount of destruction that's visited upon the world by the U.S. military and its apparatus to take their resources.
Right.
You don't even understand that why it is that everybody has a cell phone here, and people in other places can't even afford a loaf of bread that evening. But so it was an experience that I needed, but it was also a bad experience.
Right, and then so it's in this time you serve your time. Thankfully, make it through. You come back home to Baltimore, and you immediately get involved. Is it immediately that you get involved in the civil rights and human rights struggle?
Well, yes, actually, it was immediate because I came back home to get involved.
Right.
That's why I left the military. But my involvement was trying to integrate white collar jobs, because one of the things that was going on was this is 68, and so blacks were being shepherded off into blue collar jobs wherever they went, the Spurs Point, other places, and pretty much we said, well, we needed some of the, we got civil rights, we got the civil rights bill passed, this and that. We can go into places, we can eat here, we can do this, we can do that, but we don't have the money. We don't have the jobs. We don't have the ability to send our children to the colleges or institutions that has been opened up to us. So we needed to do a campaign to see whether or not we could change that. So that meant getting white-collar jobs, whether it was engineering or management, or in my particular case, I helped integrate the Spurs Point Fire Department. And the police department needed to be integrated. I wasn't going to go there. But, I did that for a number of months, me and 6 other black guys. Well, actually, it was 5. It was 6 of us all together. And we did that to kind of like open doors for other people. But shortly after that, it was clear that there was like the problems were a little more serious than just having white-collar jobs. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of racism, a lot of oppression. White supremacy was like just rearing its head all over the country. There was, quote unquote, a backlash to our push forward for black liberation and black power. And quite frankly, at the time, there were like just, hundreds of groups arming itself in the suburbia all around the city with the intentions of eventually blocking us in the city and, who knows what else. But it was clear that we needed to be able to organize ourselves and protect ourselves. And we also understood from what happened in Goodman Chaney and other people down in Mississippi and Louisiana and other places that if we were going to organize, and I think Huey and a couple other people said that if we were going to organize, we need to be able to protect ourselves, because black people organized in America were vulnerable, and they were always attacked and eventually assassinated or killed. So we had to advocate self-defense.
And did you join? And then did you join after King was assassinated? The Panther Party, that is?
Almost immediately after, in fact. And I think a lot of people did, not necessarily because we believed in what was going on with the civil rights movement. I think it had ran its course by then, and young people, especially in what we thought were northern cities, right, which we were definitely wrong about that, young people wasn't trying to hear that, smack me upside the head and spit on me and I'm going to bless you, So, I mean, there was a mood in the country that said enough is enough. And after King's assassination, there was like America looked like a war zone for a minute. I mean, there were massive riots in hundreds and hundreds of cities, and the reaction and the blowback was even devastating. Black men were rounded up, herded up, put in stadiums, locked up, abused. Even then, I was working in the fire department, and they had actually called us to work as firemen, and on my way to work, I was abused so many times I had to go back home, and even though I was on duty, right? And it was that experience that I kind of like witnessed and seen in terms of the real treatment, and the Army units were called out and that kind of stuff. And obviously people were killed, and it just made me realize that, well, okay, we really do need to organize ourselves a little better than just head in hand talking about give me a better job, because we were being really abused.
That's Marshall Eddie Conway. Dominique Stevenson is also joining us. I'm Jared Ball. This is I Mix What I Like. I mixwhatilike.org for more. Of course, you can check us Fridays, 10 a.m. at WPFW 89.3 FM and Sundays at 11 o'clock p.m. at rapstation.com. So you joined the Black Panther Party, and let's recount a little bit of that history very quickly, at least, for some who haven't heard this story. Because I think it's still, of all the stories I've read or heard in this struggle, this is still, to me, one of the more fascinating ones. You joined the Black Panther Party chapter here in Baltimore, and then you find... How long did it take before you said, okay, we there's a major problem here in this chapter of this organization, and we need a reboot, so to speak? How long did it take, and then tell us how that process went?
Well, actually, I realized that there was a problem when I joined immediately. Immediately.
Okay.
There was a party going on in the Black Panther Party, and that really wasn't what the Black Panther Party was.
Oh, you mean like an actual party?
It was
like,
an actual
get down
party
music
with swinging across the room on chandeliers.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay, there's a problem with this because it doesn't reflect what was going on a national level. It doesn't reflect what was going on in the newspapers. It doesn't reflect what was going on in other chapters.
And you're like, if I wanted this, I could have stayed over here.
They're partying. Like, what's the problem here? Mm. And of course, off the top, it was like, okay, the lack of leadership and the lack of discipline and the lack of direction. And being naive, I'm like, okay, I can get in there and help kind of like give some direction, give some leadership, help organize this a little better. It's just like a lot of people here, they got good hearts, good intentions. They really motivated. They want to do stuff, but they just don't have what they need to make it happen. So I got involved, and a couple other people that I had been working with got involved also, and we started working on it. But in the process, things eventually kept happening that shouldn't have been happening, that led me to start investigating why was this thing so disorganized, and why was this disruption continuing to happen even after we attempted to organize it. And in the process of investigating, we found out that the guy that had organized the chapter, a guy named Warren Hart, he was the captain here in Maryland, was a member of the National Security Council, or he worked for the National Security
Agency, right?
Agency,
right. Wow,
right. And they had set this chapter up so that they could have entry into the National Organizing Committee in California, so that they could have somebody, an official from this state, be part of what was going on in the organizing strategy of the national organization. Wow. And have somebody to report back. Well, we exposed him after an investigation, and he fled the country, and he went to Canada, and he joined Stokely Carmichael's organization,
the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and tried to do the same thing.
And did do the same
But
thing.
As I'm listening to this, it did do the same thing. As I'm listening to this again, I mean, I'm never underwhelmed at hearing this story over and over again. I mean, but I'm wondering, as someone who, at least on some level, tried to mimic this organizing effort of the Black Panther Party in my generational moment. And seeing and the difficulties of doing that, and still struggling around doing that. How did you even? I mean, how did that process go of addressing him and addressing the fraudulence of the leadership? I mean, how did you even do that? Like, I'm struggling even to think how I or my comrades would have done that in any organization that I've been involved in. Of following that gut feeling or seeing something is wrong and following that up and then addressing it. And then how did you all do that?
Well, I think initially when things, I at that time I was working, that was part of my responsibility as like lieutenant of security. Initially, when things start looking kind of bad, I started investigating different individuals to find out where there was a problem. And there was a problem. In fact, one of our members had gotten killed in the process, and something was not right about how that happened. And he came up short in terms of where he worked at and what his background was and so on. And I actually talked to National about it, and National actually sent an investigation team down. And I think as soon as they landed in the airport, he was on a flight out. You know, I mean, it's like he was like, heads up, they're coming to see you. So he fled. And so, but we did the investigation anyway, and we found out what we found out.
Okay.
And we exposed him and put him in the newspaper and that kind of stuff, but we never knew where he went until he showed up in Stokely Carmichael's organization. And I believe, I don't know, he tried to set up Angela Davis or somebody in there.
That I don't know, but I do know that there is actually not a lot, but there's some documentation about the things that he did in Canada, and he was actually employed by a police force there to infiltrate the movement there. And, you know, I had at one point had spoken to his son, who pretty much confirmed a lot of the things that people have said about him. He also kind of hinted that folks didn't even scratch the surface in terms of some of the things that his father had been involved in.
Well, wait a minute. Where did this conversation take place, and is it documented somewhere? Is it recorded somewhere?
No. It's not. We just were on the phone. He had reached out. To someone else in the Black Panther Party. I don't know if I got his number. I know I got it through another member, or someone who was in the Black Panther Party, and I think it was at the time that we were just kind of looking for different pieces in terms of Eddie's case. And so I called him, and we talked, you know, and he, you know, confirmed a lot of stuff that people had said, but also I just got the sense that this was a young man who was hurting, and, you know, so it was...
Hurting because of what his father had done.
He
had inherited the father's legacy.
I do believe there was something on the internet for a period of time, and then he took it down. And because there was even information in that internet website that talked about the kind of activities he participated in the Caribbean. He actually went down there, and after Stokely Carmichael's organization exposed him and put him in their paper, he fled the country, Canada this time again, and he ended up in the Caribbean, and he got involved in the Black Power movement down there. And there's rumors that actually a couple people died as a result of his involvement down there.
Yeah, I got to go back and check my man Keto Swan's work out again, because he's done a lot on the Black Power movement in the Caribbean, and particularly in Bermuda. But and he's doing work on that now. I got to remember the pieces with him. Yeah.
His work in Canada actually also resulted in at least one of the activists that he set up being deported. And I'm thinking this was in Toronto. I'm not sure. This is all kind of, you know, a little hazy.
Sure.
But this stuff is documented.
Okay. That's Dominque Stevenson and Marshall Eddie Conway. I'm Jared Ball. This conversation is taking place for I Mix What I Like, imixwhatilike.org for more information on this show and more. We don't have that much time left, and there are a couple of pieces that I definitely want to ask about. If we could double back very quickly, Eddie, I'd like to ask you. You know, you went to Vietnam. You served in Vietnam.
No, I did not.
Or you didn't go. Let me get that part straight. Then Yeah,
I did not go. I actually had volunteered to go, and I was signed up to go to Vietnam when a whole series of riots took place here in America, including the one in Detroit. But the one in Newark, New Jersey caught my eye and stopped me from going to Vietnam.
How so?
Well, and I've told this story 100 times, but I'll tell it again briefly, right? I woke up one morning while in the military in Germany and opened up the newspaper, the Stars and Stripes, and there on the front page is a armored personnel carrier. It's like a small tank with a big machine gun on it, a 50 caliber machine gun, with a little white soldier behind that machine gun, and the machine gun is pointed at a crowd of black women in Newark, New Jersey. And apparently the story read that there was a break-in in the National Guard Armory, guns were stolen, the National Guard and the Army came out. They rounded up all the black men in the community. They put them in some large holding area, and they went house to house in the black community and ransacked the houses. Well, the women were out there on the corner protesting because they would just tore up everything in their houses, and so they had these machine guns pointed at them to keep them in check. And it was at that point that I said, "Oh my God, I'm going to go to Vietnam. I'm going to be fighting for democracy and freedom in America, and to make the world a better place." And here is this unit, this army that I'm in the black community, doing the same thing to black people that we're going to go over in Vietnam and do. So that was the triggering point to make me say, okay, I'm getting out of here. I'm going back to the States. And at that time, I still thought that reform was possible. I said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to help in some kind of reform effort and see if we can straighten this stuff out.
And then, of course, you realize we need a full revolution that we're still working to make happen here one way or another because, reform is just not getting it done. It's just not getting it done. Now, I was going to ask you about Wallace Terry's book, Bloods. I don't know if you've ever read that or remember reading it, but when it was just something that from what I remember, him talking about the racism that soldiers faced in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And how many black soldiers came back and specifically joined the Black Panther Party because of what they experienced in serving this country in Vietnam. And some of us had a similar experience decades later serving in different times and spaces, but had that kind of same, man, this place is jacked up. And I'm doing, they send me over here to do this for these people, and we don't even have it back here. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and although Bloods focused on Vietnam, that racism was institutional wide in the military. It was in Germany. We had to fight the Ku Klux Klan in their secret meetings and their kill people slogans up and down the walls and stuff. And in the daytime, in fact, the sergeants, a lot of the NCOs, which were old Southern kind of, because the military was basically backboned by Southern guys that didn't have any other kind of way of surviving.
Right.
And they were in charge, and they gave us the blues, and racism was everywhere. Of course, at night, when the lights went out, we took over. But yeah, I mean, that was military. That was institutional wide. That whole racism. But I guess, coming in there, we were abused and programmed with the basic training and the advanced training, and we kind of expected that kind of abuse, and we kind of accepted it without realizing that it was really the core of white supremacy.
Right. Yeah, I remember just quickly. I remember, one of the mechanisms for coping mechanisms for dealing with the military was that we just took everything. Well, this is just how boot camp is, and this is just how it is. It's not really that serious. Yeah. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, it is. And then they have all these other institutions that back everything up. Anyway, Dominque, I did want to ask you also this time around, because I don't remember in our conversations me asking you this specific question, but how is it that you came to working with Eddie's case in particular? How and why did you end up working with Eddie's case in particular? Because I know you've done so much of the work leading the fight for his case in particular, and many others. But how did you come to this work?
It's funny because a staff person at AFSC with me,
which is the American Friends Service Committee, right?
Yeah, Kazi Torre was employed by AFSC in Boston. And Kazi, we actually had spent some time in South Africa during the UN Conference Against Racism. And Kazi's key reason for being there was really to focus folks who were talking about reparations, to focus them on the need to really seek freedom for our political prisoners. He was like, we can't even begin to have that discussion until we seek freedom for our freedom fighters, So Kazi kind of goaded and pushed, and, you really need to get in touch with Eddie. You really need to be involved in that case. And from that, I think it just, naturally, I followed up, probably slowly, but
And I guess we could say the same thing again, because now that Ta-Nehisi Coates has through the Atlantic, repositioned the issue of reparations at top of the the conversation for so many, that we can make this same claim. Because a lot of people, me included, looked at Coates and was like, well, where have you been on this issue for so long? And now you're getting in the issue. Well, so maybe we can now use the point you just made, or that was made to you, to him and everyone now returning to this issue. By the way, if you're concerned about reparations, you can't abandon the political prisoners who are there, particularly for fighting to get rid of the conditions that caused the need for reparations in the first place, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're really talking about reparations, I have to be honest, I don't really trust the mainstream dialogue on reparations.
Yeah. Oh, well.
But it's important.
Hold on. Yeah, go ahead.
But it is important to kind of like make the point also about the issue of the political prisoners, though, because like even today there are political prisoners from that era, the Black Panther era, the 60s and the 70s, that are still being held in captivity now, not because of the nature of their so-called crimes, but because of their politics, because of their ideology. I mean, other people that had crimes, alleged crimes similar, has been released 20, 25 years ago. Even white radicals, other people fighting for liberation, other people fighting for change in their communities, no matter what was involved and how deeply they engaged, they went in, did their time, and they're out now. But yet all the black political prisoners from that era is still suffering in the prison system. And that's one of the things that the black community has to really ask itself about, because if you're talking about reparation, if you're talking about saving your nation, if you're talking about moving forward, you can't forget the people that stepped up to the plate 40 years ago to try to make a difference and try to make a change. They wasn't trying to get rich. They wasn't trying to empower themselves. They wasn't trying to become famous. They were trying to make changes in our community. And so now we need to find out who they are, where they are, seek them out. There's one here in Maryland. They're scattered all over the country. We need to focus on those cases. If we call ourselves progressives today, then we need to bring that to the fore, because we don't need to keep letting those brothers and sisters die in the prison system from neglect, because that reflects on us to a great degree of where we're coming from in terms of struggle. Because 10 years from now, whoever you are out there that's listening to this, you may be a political prisoner.
Quite frankly, one of the reasons why I've always wanted to do a show like this and continue to struggle around doing a show like this is because of that very point. And I still struggle to find any national kind of conversation around political imprisonment or serious ones, even about mass incarceration, generally speaking. So it's a struggle to find ways to reach people, to raise their awareness or concern about these kinds of issues, to then get them to act on them. And one of the questions I did want to ask you about, that I think I've asked you about every time we've met, is this what you can share with us in terms of the difference between how popular media discuss imprisonment in general? Because I think that's one of the reasons why we have such a hard time having these conversations. You know, even just recently with Netflix's series Orange is the New Black and all the attention it gets, what the average media consumer gets about imprisonment is far from anything that's going to encourage any kind of radical intervention, their participation in radical intervention. What would you say, or what do you say when this question comes up, you know, in terms of the differences between the real lived experience of imprisonment and how it's depicted in television and film?
First, I guess it's important to recognize something called mass psychology and fascism, because that's really what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a psychological movement that depicts prisons and the prison industrial complex as a security system for the rest of society, when actually it's probably one of the the secondary key oppressive institutions that the ruling class uses in America to maintain control over the populations. What happens is that people on the ground, they get bombarded with negative media stories. Joe got killed, this happened, that happened, somebody got robbed, so on, so on, so on. There's always that sense of the need for security, the need for somebody to come in to protect them, the need to suppress. And it actually plays itself out in the point where if somebody gets shot at 2 o'clock in the morning in front of their house, oh, well, he must have been doing drugs. He must have been involved in the gangs. He must have been this. Instead of how it might have happened. It could have been accidental, it could have been domestic, it could have been anything. But the focus there is always on that kind of thing, and it's never on the kind of positive operations and activities that's going on throughout the community. So you get a sense of fear-produced media drama that justifies the mass incarceration of economically depressed people and people of color. That, in turn, is presented like a protective apparatus when, in fact, it's a destructive apparatus because the people that go in that system are dehumanized. A lot of them end up broken, and a lot of them end up coming out with far more hostility than they had when they went in there. And that exacerbates the destructiveness in our community. And that's one of the reasons why we do like the Friend of a Friend program, and we go and we work with prisoners, and we try to reach in the prison system and get the community to reach in the prison system and try to put some spotlight on what's going on there. Because when you take a bunch of people and you isolate them and you put them in Cumberland, Maryland, say, for instance, and they're between 18 and 25, and then you have the Abu Ghraib Guard unit that abused the prisoners over in Iraq. It's the same guard unit that's running the prison system up in Cumberland, Maryland, and you have them up there abusing young people of color, and they're 200-300 miles away from home, and they're isolated, and there's no way that their family individually can get up there and deal with them without a great expense. So they get a visit once every 2 or 3 months. And in the meanwhile, there's just real racism and abuse happening to them, and they feel isolated, they feel angry, they feel hostile, and when they do return to the community with all that in there, they act out in the community, and they end up hurting each other, but that's the results of that system. So that system is not making the community safer, it's actually making the community more dangerous. It's creating the elements that's going to be destructive tomorrow.
Marshal Eddie Conway, Dominque Stevenson, I greatly appreciate your time and your continued work. Dominque, I wanted you to as we close here, to obviously add any last comments that you have, but and give us your contact information so people want to follow the work A Friend of a Friend can do so. But, you more than anyone I've ever met has championed, and I've asked you this before, but has championed the work of Huey Newton in revolutionary suicide. I'm wondering if you could just quickly summarize what you think that phrase means, revolutionary suicide, and how does it apply to the work you and Friend of a Friend are doing right now. And again, I thank you both for joining us here at I Mix What I Like.
To me, it's knowing that you're going into a situation, one, for your people that's going to transform their lives and change the conditions that they live in, but also knowing that, like Eddie said before, that people who do that and step into that territory, that you're facing the possibility of assassination, you're facing the possibility of incarceration, which, is still a form of assassination in a sense. So to me, that's what revolutionary suicide means versus reactionary suicide, which is I can't cope with these issues, so I'm going to get high, which is, this person did this to me, so I'm going to do that to them, and it results in somebody being killed. That, is reactionary, and that's a lot of times what happens because many times we don't have that full analysis on the issues. We're not looking at the conditions in our community as a result, them being a result of oppression, them being a result of our enslavement here. We're looking at them on an individual level, and it allows us to actually reinforce those conditions and reinforce an ideology that's really destructive to us. But that book, Revolutionary Suicide, I know we were talking about Malcolm, and that book, Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X, was definitely the book that really opened up my consciousness. My son is named Malik. I was pregnant when I was reading that book, okay? But Revolutionary Suicide became like the organizer's Bible. Huey talked not only about his life, but he also talked about the programs of the Black Panther Party. He talked about the purpose behind those programs. And so that always became a guide for me. And just that concept of I am we, made me understand that it's not just about me. It's about the collective. It's about the community that I belong to. Folks can reach us at 410-323-7200. That's our office number, or by email at dstevenson@afsc.org.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.